Hana. Out of the shifting liquid of my sleep, the dream rises and takes shape. Lena's face. Lena's face floating out of the shadow. No. Not shadow. She is pushing up from the ash from a deep drift of cinders and char. Her mouth is open. Her eyes are closed. She is screaming. Hana. She is screaming for me. The ash is tumbling like sand into her open mouth, and I know she will soon be buried again, forced into silence, back into the dark. And I know too, that I have no chance of reaching her, no hope of saving her at all. Hana, she screams while I stand motionless. Forgive me, I say. Hana, help. Forgive me, Lena. Hana. My mother is standing in the doorway. I sit up, bewildered and terrified, Lena's voice echoing in my mind. I dreamed. I am not supposed to dream. What's wrong? She's silhouetted in the doorway. Behind her, I can just make out the small nightlight outside my bathroom. Are you sick? I'm fine. I pass a hand across my forehead. It comes away wet. I'm sweating. Are you sure? She moves as though to come into the room, but at the last second remains in the doorway. You cried out. I'm sure, I say. And then, because she seems to be expecting more nerves, I guess about the wedding. There's nothing at all to be nervous about, she says, sounding annoyed. Everything's under control. It will all work beautifully. I know she is talking about more than the ceremony itself. She means the marriage in general. It has been tabulated and coordinated, made to work beautifully, engineered for efficiency and perfection. My mother sighs. Try and get some sleep, she says. We're going to a church at the labs with the Hargroves at 9:30. The final dress fittings at 11. And there's the interview for house and home. Good night, Mom, I say, and she withdraws without closing the door. Privacy means less to us than it once did, another unanticipated benefit, or side effect of the cure. Fewer secrets. At least fewer secrets in most cases. I go to the bathroom and splash water on my face. Although the fan is on, I still feel overheated. For a second when I look into the mirror, I can almost see Lena's face staring at me from behind my eyes, a memory, a vision of a buried past. Blink. She's gone. Lena. Alex is not back when Raven, Tak, Julian, and I return to the safe house. Julian has revived and has insisted he is fine to walk, but Tak keeps an arm around his shoulders anyway. Julian is unsteady on his feet and still bleeding freely. As soon as we reach the safe house, Graham and Hunter babble excitedly about what happened until I give them the dirtiest look I can. Coral comes to the doorway, blinking sleepily, one arm around her stomach. Alex is not back by the time we've cleaned Julian off, broken, he says with a wince in a thick voice when Raven skates a finger over the bridge of his nose, and he is not back by the time we all finally lie down in our cots with our thin blankets, and even Julian manages to sleep, breathing noisily through his mouth. By the time we wake up, Alex has already come and gone. His belongings are missing, as well as a jug of water and one of the knives. He has left nothing except for a note, which I find neatly folded under one of my sneakers. The story of Solomon is the only way I know how to explain. And then, in smaller letters. Forgive me. Hana. 13 days until the wedding. The presents have already begun to trickle in, soup bowls and salad tongs, crystal vases, mountains of white linen, monogrammed towels, and things I've had no name for before now, ramekins. Zesters. Pestles. This is the language of married, adult life, and it is completely foreign to me. 12 days. I sit and write thank you cards in front of the television. My father leaves at least one TV on practically all the time now. I wonder if this is partly because he wants to prove that we can afford to waste electricity. For what seems like the 10th time today, Fred steps onto the screen. His face is tinged orange with foundation. The sound is muted, but I know what he is saying. The news has been broadcasting and rebroadcasting the announcement about the Department of Energy and Power, and Fred's plans for Black Night. On the night of our wedding, 1/3 of the families in Portland, anyone suspected of sympathizing or resisting, will be plunged into darkness. The lights burn bright for those who obey. The others will live in shadow all the days of their lives, the book of SHHH, Psalm 17. Fred used that quote in his speech. Thank you for the lace-edged linen napkins. They are exactly what I would have chosen for myself. Thank you for the crystal sugar bowl. It will look perfect on the dining room table. The doorbell rings. I hear my mother head to the door and the murmur of muffled voices. A moment later she comes into the room, red-faced, agitated. Fred, she says as he steps into the room behind her. Thank you, Evelyn, he says in a clipped voice, and she takes it as a cue to leave us. She closes the door behind her. Hi. I climb to my feet, wishing I were wearing something other than an old t-shirt and ratty shorts. Fred is dressed in dark jeans and a white button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbows. I feel his eyes sweep over me, absorbing my messy hair, the rip in the hem of my shorts, the fact that I am wearing no makeup. I wasn't expecting you. He doesn't say anything. There are two Freds looking at me now, Screen Fred and the real thing. Screen Fred is smiling, leaning forward easy and relaxed. The real Fred stands stiffly, glaring at me. Is something wrong? I say after the silence has extended several seconds. I cross the room to the TV and turn it off, partly so I don't have to watch Fred watching me, and partly because I can't stand the double vision. When I turn around again, I suck in a quick breath. Fred has moved closer, silently, and he is now standing a mere 6 inches away, face white and furious. I have never seen him look this way before. What? I start to say, but he cuts me off. What the hell is this? He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a folded manila envelope, throws it down on the glass coffee table. The motion sends several photographs fanning out of the envelope and onto the table. There I am, frozen, preserved in a camera lens, click. Walking, head down, next to a dilapidated house, the Tittles house in Deering Highlands, empty backpack looped over one shoulder. Click. From behind, pushing through a blur of green growth, reaching up to swat away a low-hanging branch. Click. Turning surprised, scanning the woods behind me, looking for a source of the sound, the soft rustle of movement, the click. Do you want to explain to me, Fred says coldly, what you were doing in Deering Highlands on Saturday? A flash of anger goes through me and also fear. He knows. You're having me followed. Don't flatter yourself, Hana, he says in the same flat tone. Ben Bradley's a friend of mine. He works for the Daily. He was on assignment, and he saw you going into the Highlands. Naturally, he was curious. His eyes have darkened. They're the color of wet concrete. What were you doing? Nothing, I say quickly. I was exploring. Exploring. Fred practically spits the word. Do you understand, Hana, that the Highlands is a condemned neighborhood? Do you have any idea what kind of people live there? Criminals. Infected people. Sympathizers and rebels. They nest in those buildings like cockroaches. I wasn't doing anything, I insist. I wish he wouldn't stand so close. I'm suddenly paranoid he'll be able to smell the fear, the lies, the way dogs can. You were there, Fred says. That's bad enough. Although we're separated by only a few inches, he moves forward. I unconsciously step backward, bumping into the television console behind me. I've just gone on record saying we won't tolerate any more civil disobedience. Do you know how bad it would look if people found out my pair was sneaking around in Deering Highlands? Once again, he inches forward. Now I have nowhere to go, and force myself to stay very still. He narrows his eyes. But maybe that was the whole point. You're trying to embarrass me. Mess with my plans. Make me seem like an idiot. The edge of the TV console is digging into the back of my thighs. I hate to break it to you, Fred, I say, but not everything I do is about you. In fact, most things I do are about me. Cute, he says. For a second we stand there, staring at each other. The stupidest thought comes to me when Fred and I were getting paired. Where was this hard, cold center, listed among his characteristics and qualities? Fred draws away a few inches and I allow myself to exhale. Things will be very bad for you if you go back there, he says. I force myself to meet his gaze. Is that a warning or a threat? It's a promise. His mouth quirks into a small smile. If you're not with me, you're against me. And tolerance is not one of my virtues. Cassie would tell you that, but I'm afraid she doesn't get much of an audience these days. He barks a laugh. What do you mean? I wish I could keep the tremor from my voice. He narrows his eyes. I hold my breath. For a second I think he'll admit it, what he did to her, where she is. But he simply says, I won't have you ruin what I've worked so hard to achieve. You will listen to me. I'm your pair, I say. Not your dog. It happens lightning quick. He closes the distance between us and his hand is around my throat, and the breath is crushed out of me. Panic, heavy and black, sits in my chest. Saliva builds in my throat. Can't breathe. Fred's eyes, stony and impenetrable, swim in my vision. You're right, he says. He is totally calm now as he tightens his fingers around my throat. My vision shrinks to a single point, those eyes. For a second, everything goes dark, blink, and then he is there again, staring at me, speaking in that lullaby voice. You aren't my dog. But you will still learn to sit when I tell you. You will still learn to obey. Hello? Anyone here? The voice echoes from the foyer. Instantly Fred releases me. I suck in a breath, then start to cough. My eyes are stinging. My lungs stutter in my chest, trying to suck in air. Hello? The door swings open and Debbie Sayer, my mother's hairdresser, bursts into the room. Oh. She says and stops. Her face reddens when she sees Fred and me. Mayor Hargrove, she says. I didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't interrupt, Fred says. I was on my way out. We had an appointment, Debbie adds uncertainly. She looks at me. I swipe a hand across my eyes. It comes away damp. We were going to talk styles for the wedding. I didn't get the time wrong, did I? The wedding, it seems absurd now, a bad joke. This is my promised path, with this monster who can smile in one moment and squeeze my throat in the next. I feel tears pushing at my eyes again and press my palms against my eyelids, willing them back. No, my throat is raw. You're right. Are you all right? Debbie asks me. Hana suffers from allergies, Fred answers smoothly, before I've had a chance to respond. I've told her 100 times to get a prescription. He reaches out and takes my hand, squeezes my fingers too hard, but not so much that Debbie will notice. She's very stubborn. He withdraws his hand. I bring my aching fingers behind my back, flexing them, still fighting the urge to cry. I'll see you tomorrow, Fred says, directing a smile toward me. You haven't forgotten about the cocktail party, have you? I haven't forgotten, I say, refusing to look at him. Good. He crosses the room. In the hall, I hear him begin to whistle. Debbie begins chattering the moment he is out of earshot. You're so lucky. Henry, that's my pair, looks as though he's had his face squashed by a rock. She laughs. He's a good match for me, though. We're big supporters of your husband, or soon to be, I guess we should say. Big supporters. She places a blow dryer, 2 brushes and a translucent bag of pins side by side on top of the thank you cards and the photographs, which she has not noticed. Henry met your husband just recently at a fundraiser. Where is my hairspray? I close my eyes. Maybe this is all a dream, Debbie, the wedding, Fred. Maybe I'll wake up and it will be last summer, or 2 summers ago, or 5 before any of this was real. I knew he would make a great mayor. Didn't mind Hargrove Sr., and I'm sure he did his best, but if you want my opinion, he was just a little soft. He actually wanted the crypts torn apart. She shakes her head. I say, bury them there and let them rot. I snap suddenly to attention. What? She descends on me with her hairbrush, tugging and pulling. Don't get me wrong, I liked Hargrove Sr. But I think he had the wrong idea about certain kinds of people. No, I swallow. What did you say after that? She tilts my chin forcefully up toward the light and examines me. Well, I think they should be left to rot in the crypts, criminals, and sick people. She begins looping hair, experimenting with the way it falls. Stupid. I've been so stupid. And then you think of the way he died. Debbie has returned to the subject of Fred's father. He died January 12th, the day of the incidents, after the bombs went off in the crypts. The whole eastern facade was blown clean away. Prisoners suddenly found themselves in cells with no walls and yards with no fences. There was a mass insurrection. Fred's father arrived with the police and died trying to restore order. My ideas come hard and fast like a thick snow, building a white wall I can't get above or around. Bluebeard kept a locked room, a secret space where he stashed his wives. Locked doors, heavy bolts, women rotting in stone prisons. Possible. It's possible. It fits. It would explain the note, and why she wasn't in Core's system. She might have been invalidated. Some prisoners are. Their identities, their histories, their whole lives are erased. Poof. A single keystroke, a metal door sliding shut, and it's as though they never existed. Debbie prattles on. Good riddance, I say, and they should be grateful we don't just shoot them on the spot. Did you hear about what happened in Waterbury? She laughs, a sound too loud for the quiet room. Small bursts of pain fire off in my head. On Saturday morning, in just a single hour, an enormous camp of resistors outside Waterbury was eradicated. Only a handful of our soldiers were injured. Debbie grows serious again. You know what? I think the lighting's better upstairs in your mom's room. Don't you think? I find myself agreeing, and before I know it I am also moving. I float up the stairs in front of her. I lead the way to my mother's bedroom as though I am drifting or dreaming or dead. Lena. A dull feeling settles over us after Alex's departure. He was causing problems, but he was still one of us, one of the group, and I think everyone except for Julian feels the loss. I walk around in a near daze. Despite everything, I took comfort in his presence, in seeing him, in knowing he was safe. Now that he has gone off on his own, who knows what will happen to him. He is no longer mine to lose, but the grief is there, a gnawing sense of disbelief. Coral is pale, and silent, and wide-eyed. She doesn't cry. She doesn't eat much either. Tack and Hunter talked about going after him, but Raven quickly made them see the foolishness of the idea. He no doubt had many hours head start, and a single person moving rapidly on foot is even harder to track than a group. They'd be wasting time, resources and energy. There's nothing we can do, she said, careful to avoid looking at me, but let him go. So we do. Suddenly there is no amount of lanterns that can chase away the shadows that often fall between us, the shades of other people and other lives lost to the wilds, to this struggle, to the world split in two. I can't help but think of the camp, and of Pippa and the line of soldiers we saw threading through the woods. Pippa said we could expect the contacts from resistance within 3 days, but the third day went slowly into evening with no sign of anyone. Each day, we get a little more stir-crazy. It's not anxiety, exactly. We have enough food, and, now that Tack and Hunter have found a stream nearby, enough water. Spring is here, the animals are out, and we have begun trapping successfully. But we are completely cut off from news of what has happened in Waterbury and what is happening in the rest of the country. It's far too easy to imagine, as another morning washes like a gentle wave over the old, towering oaks, that we are the only people left in the world. I can no longer bear to be inside underground. Each day, after whatever lunch we can scrounge up, I pick a direction and start walking, trying not to think about Alex and about his message to me, and usually finding that I can think of nothing else. Today, I go east. It's one of my favorite times of day, that perfect in-between moment when the light has a liquid feel, like a slow pour of syrup. Still, I can't shake loose the knot of unhappiness in my chest. I can't shake loose the idea that the rest of our lives might simply look like this running and hiding, and losing the things we love, and burrowing underground, and scavenging for food and water. There will be no turn in the tide. We will never march back into the cities, triumphant, crying out our victory in the streets. We will simply eke out a living here until there is no living to be eaten. The story of Solomon. Strange that Alex picked that story of all the stories in the book of SHHH when it was the one that so consumed me after I found out he was alive. Could he have known somehow? Could he have known that I felt just like that poor, severed baby in the story? Was he trying to tell me that he felt the same way? No. He told me that our past together, and what we shared, was dead. He told me he never loved me. I keep pushing through the woods, barely paying attention to where I'm going. The questions in my head are like a strong tide dragging me back over and over to the same places. The story of Solomon. A king's judgment. A baby cleaved in two and a stain of blood seeping into the floor. At a certain point, I realize I have no idea how long I've been walking, or how far I've ended up from the safe house. I haven't been paying attention to the landscape as I go, either a rookie's error. Grandpa, one of the oldest invalids at the homestead near Rochester, used to tell stories of sprites that supposedly lived in the wilds, switching the location of trees and rocks and rivers just to confuse people. None of us actually believed in that stuff, but the message was true enough. The wilds is a mess, a shifting maze, and will turn you around in circles. I begin retracing my steps, looking for places my heel has left imprints in the mud, scanning for signs of trampled underbrush. I force all thoughts of Alex out of my head. It's too easy to get lost in the wilderness. If you are not careful, you will be swallowed up in it forever. I see a flash of sunlight between the trees, the stream. I drew water just yesterday, and should be able to navigate back from here. But first, a quick wash. By this point, I'm sweating. I push through the last bit of undergrowth, onto a wide bank of sun-bleached grass and flat stone. I stop. Someone else is already here, a woman, crouching 40 feet down from me on the opposite bank, her hands submerged in the water. Her head is down, and all I can see is a tangle of gray hair, streaked with white. For a second I think she might be a regulator, or a soldier, but even from a distance I can tell her clothes are not standard issue. The backpack next to her is patched and old, her tank top is stained with yellow rings of sweat. A man hidden from view calls out something unintelligible, and she responds without looking up. Just another minute. My body goes tight and still. I know that voice. She draws a bit of fabric out of the water, a piece of clothing she has been washing, and straightens up. As she does, my breath stops. She holds the cloth top between two hands and winds it rapidly around itself, then unwinds it just as quickly, sending a pinwheel of water arching across the bank. And I am suddenly 5 years old again, standing in our laundry room in Portland, listening to the throaty gurgle of soapy water draining slowly from the sink, watching her do the same thing with our shirts, our underwear. Watching the stippling of water across the tile walls. Watching her turn and clip our clothing to the lines crisscrossing our ceiling, and then turn again, smiling at me, humming to herself. Lavender soap. Bleach. T-shirts dripping onto the floor. It is now. I am there. She is here. She spots me and freezes. For a second she doesn't say anything, and I have time to notice how different she is than in my memory of her. She is so much harder now, her face so sharp with angles and lines. But underneath it I detect another face, like an image hovering just underneath the surface of water, the laughing mouth and round high cheeks, the sparkling eyes. Finally she says, "Lena." I inhale. I open my mouth. I say, Mom. For an interminable minute we just stand there, staring at each other, as the past and present continue to converge and then separate. My mother now, my mother then. She starts to say something. Just then two men come crashing out of the woods, mid-conversation. As soon as they spot me, they raise their rifles. Wait, my mother says sharply, raising a hand. She's with us. I'm not breathing. I exhale as the men lower their guns. My mother continues to stare at me, silent, amazed, and something else. Afraid. Who are you? One of the men says. He has brilliant red hair, streaked with white. He looks like an enormous marmalade cat. Who are you with? My name is Lena. Miraculously, my voice doesn't tremble. My mother flinches. She always used to call me Magdalena and hated the abbreviation. I wonder whether it still bothers her after all this time. I came from Waterbury with some others. I wait for my mother to give some indication that we know each other, that I'm her daughter, but she doesn't. She exchanges a look with her two companions. Are you with Pippa? I shake my head. Pippa stayed, I say. She directed us to come here to the safe house. She told us the resistance would be coming. The other man, who is brown and wiry, laughs shortly and shoulders his rifle. You're looking at it, he says. I'm Cap. This is Max. He jerks his thumb toward the marmalade cat man, and this is B. He inclines his head toward my mother. B. My mother's name is Annabelle. This woman's name is B. My mother is always moving. My mother had soft hands that smelled like soap, and a smile like the first bit of sunlight creeping over a trimmed lawn. I do not know who this woman is. Are you heading back to the safe house? Cap asks. Yes, I managed to say. We'll follow you, he says with a half bow that, given our surroundings, seems more than a little ironic. I can feel my mother watching me again, but as soon as I look at her, she averts her eyes. We walk in near silence back to the safe house, although Max and Cap exchange a few scattered words of conversation, mostly coded talk I don't understand. My mother Annabelle, B, is quiet. As we near the safe house, I find myself unconsciously slowing, desperate to extend the walk, willing my mother to say something to acknowledge me. But all too soon we have reached the splintered over structure, and the stairway leading underground. I hang back, allowing Max and Cap to pass down the stairs first. I'm hoping my mother will take the hint too and delay for a moment, but she just follows Cap underground. Thanks, she says softly as she passes me. Thanks. I can't even be angry. I'm too shocked, too dazed by her sudden appearance, this mirage woman with the face of my mother. My body feels hollow, my hands and feet huge, balloon-like, as though they belong to someone else. I watch the hands feel their way down the wall, watch the feet go clomp 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 down the stairs. For a second I stand at the base of the stairwell, disoriented. In my absence everyone has returned. Tack and Hunter talk over each other, firing off questions. Julian rises from a chair as soon as he sees me. Raven bustles around the room, organizing, ordering people around. And in the middle of it, my mother removing her pack, taking a chair, moving with unconscious grace. Everyone else breaks apart into flutter and flurry, like moths circling a flame, undifferentiated blurs against the light. Even the room looks different now that she's inside it. This must be a dream. It has to be. A dream of my mother who is not really my mother, but someone else. Hey, Lena. Julian cups my chin in his hands and leans down to give me a kiss. His eyes are still swollen and ringed with purple. I kiss him back automatically. You okay? He pulls away from me and I purposely avoid his eyes. I'm okay, I tell him. I'll explain later. There's a bubble of air caught in my chest, making it hard to breathe or speak. He doesn't know. Nobody knows, except for Raven and maybe Tack. They've worked with me before. Now my mother won't look at me at all. She accepts a cup of water from Raven and begins to drink. And just that small motion makes anger uncoil inside me. I shot a deer today, Julian is saying. Tack spotted it halfway across the clearing. I didn't think I had a chance. Good for you, I cut him off. You pulled a trigger. Julian looks hurt. I've been horrible to him for days now. This is the problem, take away the cure, and the primers and the codes, and you are left with no rules to follow. Love comes only in flashes. It's food, Lena, he says quietly. Didn't you always tell me that this wasn't a game? I'm playing for real, for keeps. He pauses. To stay. He emphasizes the last part, and I know that he is thinking of Alex, and then I can't help but think of him too. I need to keep moving, find my balance, get away from the stifling room. Lena. Raven is at my side. Help me get some food on, will you? This is Raven's rule, stay busy. Go through the motions. Stand up. Open a can. Pull water. Do something. I follow her automatically to the sink. Any news from Waterbury? Tak asks. For a moment there is silence. My mother is the one to speak. Gone, she says simply. Raven accidentally slices too hard through a strip of dried meat and pulls her finger away, gasping, sucking it in her mouth. What do you mean, gone? Tak's voice is sharp. Wiped out. This time Cap speaks up. Mowed down. Oh my god. Hunter thuds heavily into a chair. Julian is standing perfectly rigid, taut hands clenched. Tak's face has turned stony. My mother, the woman who is my mother, sits with her hands folded on her lap, motionless, expressionless. Only Raven continues moving, wrapping a kitchen towel around her cut finger, sewing through the dried meat, back and forth, back and forth. So what now? Julian asks, voice tight. My mother looks up. Something old and deep flexes inside me. Her eyes are still the vivid blue I remember, still unchanged like a sky to tumble into. Like Julian's eyes. We have to move, she says. Give support where it can do good. The resistance is still gathering strength, gathering people. What about Pippa? Hunter bursts out. Pippa said to wait for her. She said. Hunter, Tak says. You heard what Cap said. He lowers his voice. Wiped out. There's another moment of heavy silence. I see a muscle twitch in my mother's jaw, a new tick, and she turns away, so I can see the faded green number tattooed along her neck, just beneath the vicious spate of angry scars, the products of all her failed procedures. I think about the years she spent in her tiny, windowless cell in the crypts, chipping away at the walls with the metal pendant my father had given her, carving the word love endlessly over the stone. And somehow, now, after less than a year of freedom, she has entered the resistance. More than that. She is at its center. I don't know this woman at all. I don't know how she became who she is, or when her jaw began to twitch and her hair began to gray, and she began to pull a veil over her eyes and avoid the gaze of her daughter. So where do we go? Raven asks. Max and Cap exchange a look. There's something stirring up north, Max says. In Portland. Portland. I parrot the word without meaning to speak. My mother glances up at me, and I think she looks afraid. Then she drops her eyes. That's where you come from, right? Raven asks me. I lean back against the sink, close my eyes for a second, and have a vision of my mother on the beach, running ahead of me, laughing, kicking up dark sand, a loose green tunic dress snapping around her ankles. I open my eyes again quickly and manage to nod. I can't go back there. The words come out with more force than I intended, and everyone turns to look at me. If we go anywhere, we all go together, Raven says. There's a big underground in Portland, Max says. The network is growing, has been since the incidents. That was only the beginning. What's going to happen next? He shakes his head, eyes bright. It's going to be big. I can't, I repeat. And I won't. Memories are coming fast. Hana running next to me by Back Cove, our sneakers squelching in the mud. Fireworks over the bay on the 4th of July, sending tentacles of light over the water. Alex and me lying, laughing on the blanket at 37 Brooks. Grace shivering next to me in the bedroom at Aunt Carol's, wrapping her thin arms around my waist, her smell of grape bubble gum. Layers and layers of memories, a life I have tried to bury and kill, a past that was dead, like Raven always said, suddenly surging, threatening to pull me under. And with the memories comes the guilt, another feeling I have tried so hard to bury. I left them, Hana and Grace and Alex too. I left them and I ran, and I didn't look back. It's not your decision, Tak says. Raven says, don't be a baby, Lena. Normally, I back down when Raven and Tak gang up on me. But not today. I push the guilt down under a heavy fist of anger. Everyone is staring at me, but I can feel my mother's eyes like a burn, her blank curiosity, as though I'm a specimen in a museum, some ancient foreign tool whose purpose she's trying to decipher. I won't. I slam down the can opener too hard on the counter. What's the matter with you? Raven says in a low voice. But it has gone so quiet in the room, I'm sure that everyone hears. My throat is so tight I can hardly swallow. I realize, all of a sudden, that I am on the verge of tears. Ask her, I manage to say, jerking my chin toward the woman who calls herself B. There's another moment of silence. All the eyes turn on my mother now. At least she looks guilty, she knows she's a fraud, this woman who wants to lead a revolution for love and doesn't even acknowledge her own daughter. Just then Bram comes sailing down the stairs, whistling. He's holding a large knife, which is wet with blood. He must have been cutting up the deer. His t-shirt is streaked with it too. He stops when he sees us standing there in silence. What's up? He says. What did I miss? Then, as he takes in my mom, Cap, and Max, who are you? The sight of all that blood makes my stomach heave. We're killers, all of us. We kill our lives, our past selves, the things that matter. We bury them under slogans and excuses. Before I can begin crying, I wrench away from the sink and push past Bram so roughly, he lets out a yelp of surprise. I pound up the stairs and throw myself outside, into the open air and the warm afternoon and the throaty sound of the woods opening up to spring. But even outside I feel claustrophobic. There's no place to go. There's no way to escape the crushing sense of loss, the endless exhaustion of time slowing away at the people and things that I've loved. Hana, Grace, Alex, my mother, the sea spray salt air Portland mornings and the distant cries of the wheeling seagulls, all of them broken, splintered, lodged somewhere deep, impossible to shake loose. Maybe, after all, they were right about the cure. I am no happier than I was when I believed that love was a disease. In many ways, I am less happy. I get only a few minutes away from the safe house before I stop fighting the pressure behind my eyes. My first cries are convulsions and bring up the taste of bile. I let go completely. I sink onto the tangle of undergrowth and soft moss, put my head between my legs and sob until I can't breathe, until I'm spitting up on the leaves between my legs. I cry for everything I abandoned and because I too have been left behind by Alex, by my mom, by time that has cut through our worlds and separated us. I hear footsteps behind me and know, without turning around, that it will be Raven. Go away, I say. My voice sounds thick. I drag the back of my hand across my cheeks and nose. But it's my mother who responds. You're angry at me, she says. I stop crying at once. My whole body goes cold and still. She squats down beside me, and even though I'm careful not to look up, not to look at her at all, I can feel her, can smell the sweat from her skin and hear the ragged pattern of her breathing. You're angry at me, she repeats, and her voice hitches a little. You think I don't care? Her voice is the same. For years I used to imagine that voice lilting over those forbidden words, I love you. Remember. They cannot take it. Her last words to me before she went away. She shuffles forward and squats next to me. She hesitates, then reaches out and places her palm against my cheek and turns my head toward hers so I'm forced to look at her. I can feel the calluses on her fingers. In her eyes I see myself reflected in miniature, and I tunnel back to a time before she left, before I believed she was gone forever, when her eyes welcomed me into every day and shepherded me every night into sleep. You turned out even more beautiful than I'd imagined, she whispers. She too is crying. The hard casement inside me breaks. Why? Is the only word that comes. Without intending to or even thinking about it, I allow her to draw me against her chest, let her wrap her arms around me. I cry into the space between her collarbones, inhaling the still familiar smell of her skin. There are so many things I need to ask her. What happened to you in the crypts? How could you let them take you away? Where did you go? But all I can say is, why didn't you come for me? After all those years, all that time, why didn't you come? Then I can't speak at all. My sobs become shudders. SHHH. She presses her lips to my forehead, strokes my hair just like she used to when I was a child. I am a baby once again in her arms, helpless and needy. I'm here now. She rubs my back while I cry. Slowly, I feel the darkness drain out of me, as though pulled away by the motion of her hand. Finally I can breathe again. My eyes are burning, and my throat feels raw and sore. I draw away from her, wiping my eyes with the heel of my hand, not even caring that my nose is running. I'm suddenly exhausted, too tired to be hurt, too tired to be angry. I want to sleep, and sleep. I never stopped thinking about you, my mother says. I thought of you every day, you and Rachel. Rachel was cured, I say. The exhaustion is a heaviness. It blankets out every feeling. She got paired, and she left. And you let me think you were dead. I'd still think you were dead if it weren't for Alex, I think, but don't say. Of course my mother doesn't know the story of Alex. She knows none of my stories. My mother looks away. For a second I think she will begin to cry again. But she doesn't. When I was in that place away, thinking of you, my two beautiful girls, was the only thing that kept me going. It was the only thing that kept me sane. Her voice holds an edge and undercurrent of anger, and I think of visiting the crypts with Alex, the stifling darkness and echoing, inhuman cries. The smell of Ward 6, the cells like cages. I persist, stubbornly, it was hard for me too. I had no one. And you could have come for me after you escaped. You could have told me, my voice breaks, and I swallow. After you found me at salvage, we were touching. You could have shown me your face, you could have said something. Lena. My mom reaches out to touch my face again, but this time she sees me stiffen, and she drops her hand with a sigh. Did you ever read the Book of Lamentations? Did you read about Mary Magdalene and Joseph? Did you ever wonder why I named you what I did? I read it. I read the Book of Lamentations at least a dozen times at least. It is the chapter of the book of SHHH I know the best. I looked for clues, for secret signs from my mother, for whispers from the dead. The Book of Lamentations is a story of love. More than that, it's a story of sacrifice. I just wanted you to be safe, my mother says. Do you understand that? Safe and happy. Anything I could do. Even if it meant I couldn't be with you. Her voice gets thick and I have to look away from her to stop the grief from welling up once again. My mother aged in a small square room with only a bit of eked out hope, words scratched on the walls day by day to keep her going. If I hadn't believed, if I hadn't been able to trust that. There were many times I got about, she trails off. There's no need for her to finish her sentence. I understand what she means. There were times she wanted to die. I remember I used to imagine her sometimes standing on the edge of a cliff, coke billowing behind her. I would see her. For 1 second, she would always remain suspended in the air, hovering like a vision of an angel. But always, even in my head, the cliff disappeared, and I would see her falling. I remember how I used to have nightmares in which I would stand, helpless, as she walked off the edge of a cliff, coke billowing behind her. For 1 second, she would remain suspended in the air, hovering like a vision. Then, all at once she would fall. I wonder if, in some way, she was reaching out to me through the echoes of space on those nights, whether I could sense her. For a while we let silence stretch between us. I dry the moisture from my face with my sleeve. Then I stand up. She stands with me. I'm amazed as I was when I realized that she had been the one to rescue me from salvage, that we are roughly the same height. So what now? I say. Are you taking off again? I'll go where the resistance needs me, she says. I look away from her. So you are leaving, I say, feeling a dull weight settle in my stomach. Of course. That's what people do in a disordered world, a world of freedom and choice. They leave when they want. They disappear, they come back, they leave again. And you are left to pick up the pieces on your own. A free world is also a world of fracture, just like the book of SHHH warned us. There is more truth in Zombieland than I wanted to believe. The wind blows my mother's hair across her forehead. She twists it back behind her ear, a gesture I remember from years ago. I need to make sure that what happened to me, what I was made to give up, doesn't happen again to anyone. She finds my eyes forcing me to look at her. But I don't want to leave, she adds quietly. I'd like to know you now, Magdalena. I cross my arms and shrug, trying to find some of the hardness I have built during my time in the wilds. I don't even know where to begin, I say. She spreads her hands, a gesture of submission. Me neither. But we can, I think. I can if you'll let me. She cracks a small smile. You're part of the resistance too, you know. This is what we do, we fight for what matters to us. Right. I meet her eyes. They are the clear blue of the sky stretched high above the trees, a high ceiling of color. I remember Portland beaches, kite flying, macaroni salads, summertime picnics, my mother's hands, a lullaby voice singing me to sleep. Right, I say. We walk back together, to the safe house. Hana. The crypts looks different from the way I remember it. I've been here only once before, on a school trip in 3rd grade. Weirdly, I don't remember anything about the actual visit, only that Jen Finnegan threw up in the bus afterward, and the air stank like tuna fish even after the bus driver opened all the windows. The crypts is situated at the northern border, and backs up onto the wilds and the Presumpscot River. That's why so many prisoners were able to escape during the incidents. The exploding shrapnel took out huge chunks of the border wall. The inmates who made it out of their cells just ran straight into the wilds. After the incidents, the crypts was rebuilt, and a new modern wing was attached. The crypts was always monstrously ugly, but now it is worse than ever. The steel and cement addition runs up awkwardly against the old building, made of blackened stone, with its hundreds of tiny barred windows. It's a sunny day, and beyond the high roof, the sky is a vivid blue. The whole scene feels off to me. This is a place that should never see sunlight. For a minute, I stand outside the gates wondering whether I should turn around. I came by municipal bus, which took me all the way from downtown, emptying as we got closer and closer to its final destination. At last, I shared the bus with only the driver and a large, heavily made-up woman wearing nurse's scrubs. As the bus rolled away, kicking up sprays of mud and exhaust, for a wild second I got of running after it. But I have to know. I must. So I follow the nurse as she shuffles toward the guard hut just outside the gates and flashes her ID card. The guard's eyes flick to me, and I wordlessly pass him a piece of paper. He scans the photocopy. Eleanor. I nod. I don't trust myself to speak. In the photocopy, it's impossible to make out many of her features or distinguish the dishwater color of her hair. But if he looks too closely, he'll see the details don't line up: the height, the eye color. Fortunately, he doesn't. What happened to the original? Went through the dryer, I reply promptly. I had to apply to SVS for a replacement. He turns his gaze back to the photocopy. I hope he can't hear my heart, which is beating loud and hard. Getting the photocopy was no problem. A quick phone call to Mrs. Hargrove this morning, a proposed cup of tea, A 20-minute chat and expressed desire to use the bathroom and then a 2-minute detour to Fred's study instead. I couldn't risk being identified as Fred's future wife. If Cassie is here, it's possible that some of the wardens know Fred too. And if Fred finds out I've been poking around the crypts, he has already told me I must not ask questions. Business. Just visiting. The guard grunts. He hands back my paper and waves me on as the gates begin to shutter open. Check in at the visitor's desk, he grunts. The nurse gives me a curious look before scuttling ahead of me across the yard. I can't imagine there are many visitors here. That's the whole point. Lock them up and let them rot. I cross the yard and pass through a heavy, bolted steel door and find myself in a claustrophobic entrance hall, dominated by a metal detector and several massive guards. By the time I get through the door, the nurse has already unloaded her purse onto the conveyor belt and is standing with her arms and legs spread as a guard moves over her body with a wand, checking her for weapons. She hardly seems to notice. She's busy chatting with the woman manning the check-in desk to the right, which is situated behind bulletproof glass. Same as always, she's saying. The baby kept me up all night. I'm telling you, if 2426 gives me more problems today, I'll put his ass on lockdown. Amen, says the woman behind the desk. Then she turns her eyes to me. ID. We repeat the procedure all over again. I slide the paper through the gap in the window, explain that the original was ruined. How can I help you? She asks. I've been crafting my story carefully for the past 24 hours, but still I find the words come haltingly. I'm here to visit my aunt. You know what ward she's in? I shake my head. No, see. I didn't even know she was here. I mean, I just found out. For most of my life, I got she was dead. The woman shows no reaction to this statement. Name. Cassandra. Cassandra O'Donnell. I squeeze my fists and focus on the pain running through my palms as she keys the name into her computer. I'm not sure whether I'm hoping her name will come up or not. The woman shakes her head. She has watery blue eyes and a mass of frizzy blonde hair, which in this light appears to be the same dull gray as the walls. Nothing here. You got an intake month. How many years ago did Cassie disappear? I remember overhearing at Fred's inauguration that he has been without a pair for 3 years. I hazard a guess. January or February. 3 years ago. She sighs and hauls herself out of her chair. Only went computerized last year. She passes out of view, then returns with a large, leather-bound book, which she sets down on her side of the counter with a bang. She flips forward a few pages, then opens a window in the glass and slides the book out to me. January and February, she says shortly. It's all organized by date. If she came through here, she'll be there. The book is oversized, its pages crisscrossed with spidery writing, intake dates, prisoner names, and corresponding prisoner numbers. The period from January through February runs several pages, and I'm uncomfortably aware of the woman watching me impatiently as I move my finger slowly down the column of names. There's a tight feeling in my stomach. She's not here. Of course, I might have the dates wrong, or I might have been wrong altogether. Maybe she never came to the crypts at all. I think of Fred laughing, saying, she doesn't get much of an audience these days. Any luck? The woman asks without real interest. Just a second. A bead of sweat rolls down my spine. I flip to April and continue my search. Then I see a name that stops me, Melania O. Melania. That was Cassandra's middle name. I remember overhearing that at Fred's inauguration and seeing it on the letter I stole from Fred's study. Here, I say. It makes sense that Fred would not have entered her under her real name. The point, after all, was to make her disappear. I push the book back through the plate glass window. The woman's eyes slide from Melania O to the inmate number assigned to her 2225. She keys this into the computer, repeating the number under her breath. Ward B, she says. New wing. She types a few more commands into her keyboard, and a printer behind her shudders to life, regurgitating a small white sticker with Visitor Ward B printed neatly across it. She slides it through the window to me, along with another thinner, leather-bound book. Sign your name and date in the visitor's log, and mark the name of the person you're visiting. Place the sticker on your chest. It must be visible at all times. And you'll have to wait for an escort. Go on through security, and I'll page someone down here to get you. She runs through this last speech quickly, tonelessly. I fish a pen from my bag and write Eleanor laterally in the allotted position, praying she doesn't ask to see my ID card. The visitor's log is very slender. Only 3 visitors have come here in the past week. My hands have begun to shake. I have trouble wrestling off my jacket after the security guards instruct me that it must go on the conveyor belt. My bag and shoes are also placed in trays for inspection, and I have to stand with my arms and legs spread as the nurse did as one of the men pats me down roughly, waving a wand between my legs and over my breasts. Clear, he says, stepping aside to let me pass. Just past security is a small waiting area, outfitted with several cheap plastic chairs and a plastic table. Beyond that, I see various hallways branching, and signs pointing the way to different wards and portions of the complex. A TV is playing in the corner, muted, a political broadcast. I avert my eyes quickly, just in case Fred comes on the screen. A nurse with tufts of black hair and a shiny greasy face comes slapping down the hallway toward me, wearing blue hospital clogs and floral scrubs. Her name card reads Jan. You for Ward B. She pants at me when she comes close. I nod. Her perfume is vanilla, sickly sweet and too strong, but it still can't completely conceal the other smells of the place, bleach, body odor. This way. She pads in front of me to a heavy set of double doors, using a hip to bump them open. Beyond the doors, the atmosphere changes. The hallway we've entered is sparkling white. This must be the new wing. The floors, walls, and even the ceiling are made of the same spotless paneling. Even the air smells different, cleaner, and newer. It's very quiet, but as we move down the hall, I hear the occasional sounds of muffled voices, the beeping of mechanical equipment, the slap 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 of another nurse's clogs down another hallway. Been here before. Jan wheezes. I shake my head, and she shoots me a sidelong glance. Got not. We don't get many visitors around here. What's the point, I say. I just found out that my aunt. She cuts me off. Gonna have to leave your bag outside the ward. Pant pant pant. Even a nail file will do it in a pinch. And we'll have to give you some clogs. Can't have you wearin' those laces in the ward. Last year one of our guys strung himself up to a pipe, quick as a flash when he got hold of some laces. Dead as a doornail by the time we found him. Who are you here for? She says all this so quickly, I can barely follow the thread of her conversation. An image flashes, someone swinging from the ceiling, laces knotted around the throat. In my mind the person swings, revolving toward me. Weirdly, it's Fred's face I picture, huge and bulging and red. I'm here to see Melania. I watch the nurse's face, see the name means nothing to her. Number 2225, I add. Apparently, people go solely by their numbers in the crypts, because the nurse lets out a noise of recognition. She won't give you no trouble, she says conspiratorially, as though she's sharing a great secret. She's quiet as a church mouse. Well, not always. I remember the first few months, she was shouting and shouting. I don't belong here. I'm not crazy. The nurse laughs. Course, that's what they all say. And then you start listening, and they'll run your ear off talking little green men and spiders. She's crazy then. I say. Wouldn't be here if she wasn't, would she? Jan says. She obviously doesn't expect an answer. We've arrived at another set of double doors, this one marked with a sign that reads Ward B, Psychosis, Neurosis, Hysteria. Go on and grab yourself a pair of slippers, she resumes cheerfully, pointing. Outside the doors are a bench and a small wooden bookcase, on which several plastic-sheathed hospital slippers have been placed. The furniture is obviously old, and looks strange in the middle of all the gleaming whiteness. Leave your shoes and your bag right here. Don't worry. No one will take them. The criminals are in the old wards. She laughs again. I sit on the bench and fumble with my shoelaces, wishing I'd got to wear boots or flats instead. My fingers feel clumsy. So she screamed. I prompt. When she first came, I mean. The nurse rolls her eyes. Got her husband was trying to do her in. Shouted conspiracy to anyone who'd listen. My whole body goes cold. I swallow. Do her in. What do you mean? Don't worry. Jan waves a hand. She went quiet pretty soon. Most of 'em do. Takes her medicine regular, like doesn't give nobody no trouble. She pats my shoulder. Ready. I can only nod, although ready is the last thing I feel. My body is filled with a need to turn to run. But instead I stand up and follow Jan through the double doors into another hallway, as spotlessly white as the one we have just passed through, lined on both sides with white windowless doors. Each step seems to be harder than the last. I can feel the chilly bite of the floor through the slippers, which are tissue thin, and every time I put a heel down, a shiver runs all the way up my spine. Too soon, we reach a door marked 2225. Jan raps twice on the door hard, but doesn't seem to expect a response. She removes her key card from around her neck, holds it up to the scanner to the left of the door. We got all new systems after the incidents. Neat, huh? And when the lock slides open with a click, pushes the door open firmly. Got a visitor, she calls cheerfully as she passes into the room. This last step is the hardest. For a second I think I won't be able to do it. I have to practically throw myself forward, over the threshold into the cell. As I do, the air leaves my chest. She is sitting in the corner in a plastic chair with rounded corners, staring out of a small window fitted with heavy iron bars. She doesn't turn when we enter, although I can make out her profile, which is just touched with the light filtering in from outside. The small, ski jump nose, the exquisite little mouth, the long fringe of lashes, her seashell pink ear, and the neat procedural scar just beneath it. Her hair is long and blonde, and hangs loose, nearly to her waist. I estimate that she's about 30. She is beautiful. She looks like me. My stomach lurches. Morning, Jan says loudly, as if Cassandra won't hear us otherwise, even though the room is tiny. It's too small to contain all of us comfortably, and even though the space is bare except for a cot, a chair, a sink, and a toilet, it feels overcrowded. Brought somebody to see you. Nice surprise, isn't it? Cassandra doesn't speak. She doesn't even acknowledge us. Jan rolls her eyes expressively, mouths "I'm sorry" to me. Out loud, she says, "Come on now. Don't be rude. Turn around and say hello like a good girl." Cassie does turn then, although her eyes pass over me completely and go directly to Jan. "May I have a tray, please? I missed breakfast this morning." Jan puts her hands on her hips and says, in an exaggerated tone of reproach, as though she is speaking to a child now, "That was silly of you, wasn't it?" "I wasn't hungry," Cassie says simply. Jan sighs. "You're lucky I'm feeling nice today," she says with a wink. "You okay here for a minute?" This question is directed to me. Don't worry," Jan says. She's harmless. She raises her voice and assumes the forced cheerful tone. "Be right back. You be a good girl. Don't make no trouble for your guest." She turns once again to me. "Any problems, just hit the emergency button next to the door." Before I can respond, she bustles into the hallway again, closing the door behind her. I hear the lock slide into place. Fear stabs, sharp and clear, through the muffling effects of the cure. For a moment there is silence, as I try to remember what I came here to say. The fact that I have found her, the mysterious woman, is overwhelming, and I suddenly can't think of what to ask her. Her eyes click to mine. They are hazel, and very clear. Smart. Not crazy. Who are you? Now that Jan has left the room, her voice takes on an accusatory edge. What are you doing here? My name is Hana Tate, I say. I suck in a deep breath. I'm marrying Fred Hargrove next Saturday. Silence stretches between us. I feel her eyes sweeping over me and force myself to stand still. His taste hasn't changed, she says neutrally. Then she turns back to the window. Please. My voice cracks a little. I wish I had some water. I'd like to know what happened. Her hands are still in her lap. She must have perfected this art over the years, sitting motionless. I'm crazy, she says tonelessly. Didn't they tell you? I don't believe it, I say, and it's true, I don't. Now that I'm speaking to her, I know for a fact that she is sane. I want the truth. Why? She turns back to me. Why do you care? So it won't happen to me. So I can stop it. That's the true and selfish reason. But I can't say that. She has no reason to help me. We are not made to care for strangers any longer. Before I can think of anything to say, she laughs, a dry sound, as though her throat has been long in disuse. You want to know what I did, don't you? You want to be sure you don't make the same mistake. No, I say, although of course she's right. That's not what I. Don't worry, she says. I understand. A smile passes briefly across her face. She looks down at her hands. I was paired with Fred when I was 18, she says. I didn't go to university. He was older. They'd had trouble finding a match for him. He was picky, he was allowed to be picky, because of who his father was. Everyone said I was lucky. She shrugs. We were married for 5 years. That makes her younger than I got. What went wrong? I ask. He got tired of me. She states this firmly. Her eyes flick to mine momentarily. And I was a liability. I knew too much. What do you mean? I want to sit down on the cot. My head feels strangely light, and my legs feel impossibly far away. But I'm afraid to move. I'm afraid even to breathe. At any second, she can order me out. She owes me nothing. She doesn't answer me directly. Do you know what he liked to do when he was a little kid? He used to lure the neighborhood cats into his yard, feed them milk, give them tuna fish, earn their trust. And then he would poison them. He liked to watch them die. The room feels smaller than ever, stifling and airless. She turns her gaze to me again. Her calm, steady stare disconcerts me. I will myself not to look away. He poisoned me too, she says. I was sick for months and months. He told me finally. Ricin in my coffee. Just enough to keep me sick, in bed, dependent. He told me so I would know what he was capable of. She pauses. He killed his own father, you know. For the first time I wonder if maybe, after all, she is crazy. Maybe the nurse was right, maybe she does belong here. The idea is a deliverance. Fred's father died during the incidents, I say. He was killed by invalids. She looks at me pityingly. I know that. As though she is reading my mind, she adds, I have eyes and ears. The nurses talk. And of course I was in the old wing, when the bombs exploded. She looks down at her hands. 300 prisoners escaped. Another dozen were killed. I wasn't lucky enough to be in either group. But what has that got to do with Fred? I ask. A whine has crept into my voice. Everything, she says. Her tone turned sharp. Fred wanted the incidents to happen. He wanted the bombs to go off. He worked with the invalids, he helped plan it. It can't be true. I can't believe her. I won't. That doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense. Fred must have planned it for years. He worked with the DFA. They had the same idea. Fred wanted his father proven wrong about the invalids, and he wanted his father dead. That way, Fred would be right, and Fred would be mayor. A shock runs up my spine when she mentions the DFA. In March, at an enormous rally of Deliria Free America in New York City, invalids attacked, killing 30 citizens and injuring countless more. Everyone compared it to the incidents, and for weeks security everywhere was tightened. It scanned, vehicles searched, homes raided, and patrols on the streets doubled. But there were other whispers too. Some people said that Thomas Feynman, the DFA's president, had known in advance what would happen, and had even allowed it. Then, 2 weeks later, Thomas Feynman was assassinated. I don't know what to believe. My chest is aching with a feeling I can't remember how to name. I liked Mr. Hargrove, Cassandra says. He felt sorry for me. He knew what his son was. He used to visit every so often after Fred had me locked up. Fred got people to testify that I was a lunatic. Friends. Doctors. They committed me to life in this place. She gestures toward the small white room, her burial place. But Mr. Hargrove knew I wasn't crazy. He told me stories about the world outside. He found my mother and father a place to live in Deering Highlands. Fred wanted them silenced too. He must have got I'd told them. He must have got they knew what I knew. She shakes her head. But I hadn't. They didn't. So Cassie's parents were forced into the Highlands like Lena's family. I'm sorry, I say. It's the only thing I can think of, even though I know how flimsy it sounds. Cassie doesn't seem to hear me. That day when the bombs went off, Mr. Hargrove was visiting. He brought me chocolate. She turns to the window. I wonder what she is thinking. She is perfectly still again, her profile just traced with dull sunlight. I heard he died trying to restore order. Then I felt sorry for him. Funny, isn't it? But I guess Fred got us both in the end. Here I am. Better late than never. Jan's voice makes me jump. I spin around. She is pushing through the door, carrying a plastic tray with a plastic cup of water and a small plastic bowl of lumpy oatmeal. I step out of the way as she plunks the tray down on the cot. I notice that the silverware is plastic too. Of course, there would be no metal. No knives either. I think of the man swinging by his shoelaces, close my eyes, and think of the bay instead. The image breaks away on the waves. I open my eyes again. So what do you think? Jan says brightly. You want to tuck in now? Actually, I think I'll wait, Cass says softly. Her gaze is still directed out the window. I'm not hungry anymore. Jan looks at me and rolls her eyes as though to say, crazies. Lena. We waste no time in leaving the safe house. Now that it's been decided, we go to Portland as a group, to join with the resistance there and add our strength to the agitators. Something large is in the works, but Cap and Max refuse to say a word about it, and my mother claims they all know only the sketchiest details anyway. Now that the wall has come down between us, I'm no longer so resistant to returning to Portland. In fact, a small part of me even looks forward to it. My mother and I talk around the campfire while we eat. We talk late into the night until Julian pokes his head out of the tent sleepy and disoriented and tells me I should really get some sleep. Or until Raven yells at us to shut the hell up. We talk in the morning. We talk as we walk. We talk about what my life in the wilds and hers have been like. She tells me that she was involved in the resistance even when she was in the crypts. There was a mole, a resistor, a cured who still had sympathies for the cause and worked as a guard in Ward 6 where my mother was imprisoned. He was blamed for my mother's escape and became a prisoner himself. I remember him. I saw him curled, fetus-like in the corner of a tiny stone cell. I haven't told my mother this though. I haven't told her that Alex and I gained admittance to the crypts because it would mean talking about him. And I can't bring myself to speak about him, not with her, not with anyone. Poor Thomas. My mother shakes her head. He fought hard to get placed in Ward 6. He sought me out deliberately. She looks at me sideways. He knew Rachel, you know, long ago. I think he always resented that he had to give her up. He stayed angry, even after his cure. I squeeze my eyes shut against the sun. Long buried images begin flashing, Rachel locked in her room, refusing to come out and eat. Thomas's pale, freckled face floating at the window, gesturing for me to let him in. Crouching in the corner on the day they dragged Rachel to the labs, watching her kick and scream and bare her teeth like an animal. I must have been 8. It was only a year after my mom died, or after I was told she had died. Thomas Dale, I blurt out. The name has stuck with me all these years. My mom passes her hand absent-mindedly through a field of waving grasses. In the sun, her age, and the lines on her face, are starkly obvious. I barely remembered him. And of course, he had changed a great deal by the time I saw him again. It had been 3-4 years. I remember I caught him hanging around the house once when I came home early from work. He was terrified. He thought I would tell. She barks a laugh. That was just before I was taken. And he helped you, I say. I try to force his face into clarity in my mind to make the details resurface, but all I see is the filthy figure curled on the floor in a grimy cell. My mom nods. He couldn't quite forget what he had lost. It stayed with him. It does, you know, for some people. I always got it did for your father. So Dad was cured. I don't know why I feel so disappointed. I didn't even remember him. He died of cancer when I was 1. He was. A muscle twitches in my mom's jaw. But there were times I felt. There were times it seemed as though he could still feel it just for a second. Maybe I only imagined it. It doesn't matter. I loved him anyway. He was very good to me. She brings her hand unconsciously to her neck, as though feeling for the necklace she wore, my grandfather's military pendant given to her by my dad. She used it to tunnel her way from the crypts. Your necklace, I say. You still aren't used to being without it. She turns to me, squinting. She manages a small smile. There are some losses we never get over. I tell my mother about my life too, especially what has happened since crossing from Portland, and how I came to be involved with Raven, TAC, and the Resistance. Occasionally we bring up memories from the time before, too, the lost time before she went away, before my sister was cured, before I was placed in Aunt Carol's house. But not too much. As my mother said, there are some losses we never get over. Certain subjects remain completely off limits. She doesn't ask what compelled me to cross in the first place, and I don't volunteer to tell her. I keep Alex's note in a little leather pouch around my neck, a gift from my mom procured from a trader earlier in the year, but it is a memento from a past life, like carrying the picture of someone who is dead. My mother knows, of course, that I have found my way into loving. Occasionally, I catch her watching me with Julian. The look on her face, pride, grief, envy, and love commingled, reminds me that she is not just my mother, but a woman who has fought her whole life for something she has never truly experienced. My dad was cured. And you can't love not fully, unless you are loved in return. It makes me ache for her, a feeling I hate and am somehow ashamed of. Julian and I have found our rhythm again. It's as though we have skated over the past few weeks, skated over Alex's long shadow, and landed neatly on the other side. We can't get enough of each other. I'm amazed by every part of him again, his hands, his low, gentle way of speaking, all his different laughs. At night, in the dark, we reach for each other. We lose ourselves in the nighttime rhythm, in the hoots and cries and moans from the animals outside. And despite the dangers of the wilds, and the constant threat of regulators and scavengers, I feel free for the first time in what feels like forever. One morning I emerge from the tents and find that Raven has overslept, and it is instead Julian and my mom who have been stoking the fire. Their backs are turned toward me, and they are laughing about something. Faint wisps of smoke twist up into the fine spring air. For a moment I stand perfectly still, terrified, feeling as though I am on the brink of something. If I move at all, take a step forward or back, the image will break apart in the wind, and they'll scatter into dust. Then Julian turns and sees me. "Morning, beauty," he says. His face is still bruised and swollen in places, but his eyes are exactly the color of early morning sky. When he smiles, I think he is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. My mom grabs a bucket and stands. "I was going for a shower," she says. "Me too," I say. As I wade into the still freezing stream, the wind raises goosebumps on my body. A cloud of swallows skates across the sky. The water carries a slight taste of grit. My mother hums downstream. This is not any kind of happiness that I imagined. It is not what I chose. But it's enough. It is more than enough. On the border of Rhode Island, we encounter another group of about 24 homesteaders, who are on their way to Portland as well. All but 2 of them are on the side of the resistance, and the 2 who don't care to fight don't dare to be left alone. We are nearing the coast, and the detritus of old life is everywhere. We come across a massive cement honeycomb structure, which TAC identifies as an old parking garage. Something about the structure makes me anxious. It's like a towering stone insect, outfitted with 100 eyes. The whole group falls silent as we pass under its shadow. The hair on my neck is standing up, and even though it's stupid, I can't shake the feeling that we are being watched. TAC, who is leading the group, holds up his hand. We all come to an abrupt stop. He cocks his head, obviously listening for something. I hold my breath. It's quiet, except for the usual rustle of animals in the woods, and the gentle sighing of the wind. Then a fine spray of gravel lands on us from above as though someone has accidentally towed it out of one of the upper levels of the parking garage. Instantly, everything is blur in motion. Get down, get down. Max yells as all of us are reaching for weapons, unshouldering rifles, and dropping into the underbrush. Coo-ee. The shout freezes us. I crane my head toward the sky, shielding my eyes from the sun. For a second, I'm sure I'm dreaming. Pippa has emerged from the dark caverns of the honeycomb structure and stands on a sun-drenched ledge, waving a red handkerchief down at us, grinning. Pippa. Raven cries out, her voice strangled. Only then do I believe it. Hey, yourself, Pippa shouts down. And slowly from behind her, more and more people edge into view, masses of skinny, ragged people, packed into all the different levels of the garage. When Pippa finally makes it to the ground, she is immediately engulfed by TAC, Raven, and Max. Beast is alive too. He lopes out into the sunshine directly behind Pippa, and it seems almost too much to believe. For 15 minutes, we do nothing but shout and laugh and talk over one another, and not a single word gets said that anyone understands. Finally, Max makes himself heard over the chaos of competing voices and laughter. What happened? He's laughing, breathless. We heard no one escape. We heard it was a massacre. Instantly, Pippa grows serious. It was a massacre, she says. We lost hundreds. The tanks came and encircled the camp. They used tear gas, machine guns, shells. It was a bloodbath. The screaming she breaks off. It was awful. How did you get out? Raven asks. We have all gotten quiet. Now it seems horrible that only a second earlier we were laughing, rejoicing in Pippa's safety. We had hardly any time, Pippa says. We tried to warn everyone. But you know how it was, chaos. Hardly anyone would listen. Behind her, invalids are stepping tentatively out into the sunlight, emerging from the parking garage wide-eyed, silent, nervous, like people who have weathered a hurricane and are amazed to see the world still exists. I can only imagine what they witnessed at Waterbury. How did you get around the tanks? B asks. It's still hard for me to think of her as my mother when she acts like this, like a hardened member of the resistance. For now, I am content to allow her to exist doubly. She is my mother sometimes, and sometimes a leader and a fighter. We didn't run, Pippa says. There was no chance. The whole area was swarming with troops. We hid. A spasm of pain crosses her face. She opens her mouth as though to say more, and then closes it again. Where did you hide? Max presses. Pippa and Beast exchange an indecipherable look. For a moment, I think Pippa will refuse to answer. Something happened at the camp, something she won't tell us. Then she coughs and turns her eyes back to Max. In the riverbed at first, before the shooting started, she says. It didn't take long for the bodies to start falling. We were protected under them once they did. Oh my God. Hunter balls his fist into his right eye. He looks like he's about to be sick. Julian turns away from Pippa. We had no choice, Pippa says sharply. Besides, they were already dead. At least their bodies didn't go to waste. We're glad you made it, Pippa, Raven says gently, and places a hand on Pippa's shoulder. Pippa turns to her gratefully, her face suddenly eager, open like a puppy's. I was planning to get word to you at the safe house, but I figured you had already left, she says. I didn't want to risk it when there were troops in the area. Too conspicuous. So I went north. We stumbled on the hive by accident. She jerks her chin to the vast parking structure. It really does look like a gigantic hive now that there are figures, half-shadowed, peering down at us from its different levels, flitting through patches of light and then retreating once again into the darkness. Figured it was a good place to hide out for a bit and wait for things to settle down. How many you got? TAC asks. Dozens and dozens of people have descended and are standing herded together, a little ways behind Pippa, like a pack of dogs that has been beaten and starved into submission. Their silence is disconcerting. More than 300, Pippa says. Closer to 4. A huge number, still, only a fraction of the number of people who were camped outside Waterbury. For a moment I am filled with a blind, white-hot rage. We wanted the freedom to love, and instead we have been turned into fighters, savages. Julian moves close to me and puts his arm around my shoulder, allowing me to lean into him as though he can sense what I am thinking. We've seen no sign of the troops, Raven says. My guess is they came up from New York. If they had tanks, they must have used one of the service roads along the Hudson. Hopefully they've gone south again. Mission accomplished, Pippa says bitterly. They haven't accomplished anything. My mother speaks up again, but her voice is softer now. The fight isn't over, it's only beginning. We're headed to Portland, Max says. We have friends there, lots of them. There'll be payback, he adds with sudden fierceness. An eye for an eye. And the whole world goes blind, Coral puts in quietly. Everyone turns to look at her. She has barely spoken since Alex left, and I have been careful to avoid her. I feel her pain like a physical presence, a dark, sucking energy that consumes and surrounds her, and it makes me both pity and resent her. It's a reminder that he was no longer mine to lose. What did you say? Max says with barely concealed aggression. Coral looks away. Nothing, she says. It's just something I once heard. We have no choice, my mother insists. If we don't fight, we'll be destroyed. It's not about payback. She shoots a look at Max, and he grunts and crosses his arms. It's about survival. Pippa runs a hand over her head. My people are weak, she says finally. We've been living on scraps, rats, mostly, and what we could forage in the woods. There will be food up north, Max says. Supplies. Like I said, the resistance has friends in Portland. I'm not sure they'll make it, Pippa says, lowering her voice. Well, you can't stay here, either, Tack points out. Pippa bites her lip and exchanges a look with Beast. He nods. He's right, Pip, Beast says. Behind Pippa, a woman speaks up suddenly. She is so thin, she looks as though she has been whittled from ancient wood. We'll go. Her voice is surprisingly deep and forceful. Set in her sunken shipwreck face, her eyes burn like two smoldering coals. We'll fight. Pippa exhales slowly. Then she nods. All right, then she says. Portland it is. As we draw closer to Portland, as the light and land grow more familiar, lush with growth and smells I know from childhood, from my longest, oldest memories, I begin to make my plans. 9 days after we left the safe house, our numbers now hugely swollen, we catch a glimpse of one of the Portland border fences. Only now it is no longer a fence. It's a huge cement wall, a faceless slab of stone, stained an unearthly pink in the dawn light. I'm so startled, I stop short. What the hell? Max is walking behind me, and has to dodge at the last second. New construction, he says. Tighten border control. Tighten control everywhere. Portland's making an example. He shakes his head and mutters something. This image, the sight of a wall, newly erected, has made my heart start pounding. I left Portland less than a year ago, but already it has changed. I'm seized by a fear that everything will be different on the inside of the wall too. Maybe I won't recognize any of the streets. Maybe I won't be able to find my way to Aunt Carol's house. Maybe I won't be able to find Grace. I can't help but worry about Hana too. I wonder where she will be once we begin pouring into Portland, the cast-out children, the prodigal sons like the angels described in the book of Shhh who were thrown out of heaven for harboring the disease, expelled by an angry God. But I remind myself that my Hana, the Hana I knew and loved, is gone now. I don't like it, I say. Max swivels around to look at me, one corner of his mouth quirked into a smile. Don't worry, he says. It won't be standing too much longer. He winks. So. More explosions. It makes sense. We need to move a large number of people into Portland somehow. A high, thin whistle disrupts the morning stillness. East. He and Pippa have been scouting ahead of the group this morning, tracing the periphery of the city, looking for other invalids, signs of a camp or homestead. We turn toward the sound. We've been walking since midnight, but now we find renewed energy and move more quickly than we have all night. The trees spit us out at the edge of a large clearing. The growth has been rigorously trimmed back, and a long, well-tended alley of green extends a quarter of a mile into the distance. In it are trailer homes propped on cinder blocks and chunks of concrete, as well as rusted truck beds, tents, and blankets strung up from tree branches to form makeshift canopies. People are already moving around the camp, and the air smells like smoking wood. Beast and Pippa are standing a little ways away, conversing with a tall, sandy-haired man outside one of the trailers. Raven and my mother begin shepherding the group into the clearing. I stay where I am, rooted to the spot. Julian, realizing I am not with the group, doubles back to me. What's the matter? He asks. His eyes are red. He has been doing more than almost anyone, scouting, foraging, standing watch while the rest of us are sleeping. I know where we are, I say. I've been here before. I don't say with Alex. I don't have to. Julian's eyes flicker. Come on, he says. His voice is strained, but he reaches out and takes my hand. His palms have grown calloused, but his touch is still gentle. I scan instinctively across the line of trailers, trying to pick out the one Alex had claimed for himself. But that was last summer in the dark, and I was terrified. I don't remember any of its features but the roll-away, plastic tarp roof, which won't be distinguishable from where I'm standing. I feel a brief flicker of hope. Maybe Alex is here. Maybe he came back to familiar grounds. The sandy-haired man is speaking to Pippa. You got here just in time, he says. He is much older than he appeared from a distance, in his 40s at least, although his neck is unblemished. He has obviously not spent any significant amount of time in Zombieland. Game time is tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow. Pippa repeats. She and Tack exchange a look. Julian squeezes my hand. I feel a pulse of anxiety. Why so soon? If we had more time to plan. And more time to eat, Raven cuts in. Half our number is practically starving. They won't put up a very good fight. The sandy-haired man spreads his hands. It wasn't my decision. We've been coordinating with our friends on the other side. Tomorrow is our best chance for getting in. A large portion of security will be busy tomorrow. There's a public event down by the labs. They'll be pulled away from the perimeter to guard it. Pippa rubs her eyes and sighs. My mother puts in, who's going in first? We're still working out the details, he says. We didn't know whether resistance got the word out. We didn't know whether we could expect any help. When he speaks to my mom, his whole manner changes. He becomes more formal, and more respectful too. I see his eyes skate down to the tattoo on her neck, the one that marks her as a former prisoner of the Crips. He obviously knows what it means, even if he has not spent time in Portland. You have help now, my mother says. The sandy-haired man looks out over our group. More and more people are pushing out of the woods, flowing into the clearing, huddling together in the weak morning light. He starts slightly, as though he has only just become aware of our number. How many of you are there? He asks. Raven smiles, showing all her teeth. Enough, she says. Hana. The Hargroves' house is blazing with light. As our car turns into the drive, I have the impression of a massive white boat run aground. In every single window a lamp is burning. The trees in the yard have been strung with miniature white lights, and the roof is crowned with them as well. Of course, the lights are not about celebration. They are a statement of power. We will have control, possess, even waste, and others will wither away in the dark, sweat in the summer freeze as soon as the weather changes. Don't you think it's lovely, Hana? My mother says as black-suited attendants materialize from the darkness and open up the car door. They stand back and wait for us, hands folded, respectful, deferential, silent. Fred's work, probably. I think about his fingers tightening around my throat. You will still learn to sit when I tell you. And the flatness of Cassandra's voice, the dull resignation in her eyes. He poisoned cats when he was little. He liked to watch them die. Lovely, I echo. She turns to me in the act of swinging her legs out of the car and frowns slightly. You're very quiet tonight. Tired, I say. The past week and a half has slipped away so quickly, I can't remember individual days. Everything blurs together, turns the muddled gray of a confused dream. Tomorrow, I marry Fred Hargrove. All day I have felt as though I am sleepwalking, seeing my body move and smile and speak, get dressed and lotioned and perfumed, float down the stairs to the waiting car, and now drift up the flagstone path to Fred's front door. See Hana walk. See Hana stepping into the foyer, blinking in the brightness, a chandelier sending rainbow shards of light across the walls. Lamps crowding the hall table and bookshelves. Candles burning in hard sterling candlesticks. See Hana turning into the packed living room, 100 bright and bloated faces turning to look at her. There she is. Here comes the bride. And Mrs. Tate. See Hana say hello, wave and nod, shake hands and smile. Hana. Perfect timing. I was just singing your praises. Fred is striding across the room toward me, smiling, his loafer sinking soundlessly into the thick carpet. See Hana give her almost husband an arm. Fred leans in to whisper, you look very pretty. And then, I hope you took our conversation to heart. As he says it, he pinches my arm, hard on the fleshy inside just above my elbow. He gives his other arm to my mother, and we move into the room while the crowd parts for us, the rustle of silk and linen. Fred steers me through the crowd, pausing to chat with the most important members of city government and his largest benefactors. I listen and laugh at the right moments, but all the time I still feel as though I am dreaming. Brilliant idea, Mayor Hargrove. I was just saying to Ginny. And why should they have light? Why should they get anything from us at all? Soon put an end to the problem. My father is already here. I see that he is talking to Patrick Riley, the man who took over as the head of Deliria Free America after Thomas Feynman was assassinated last month. Riley must have come up from New York, where the group is headquartered. I think of what Cassandra told me that the DFA worked with the Invalids, that Fred has too, that both attacks were planned, and feel as if I'm going crazy. I no longer know what to believe. Maybe they'll lock me in the crypts with Cassandra, and take away my shoelaces. I have to swallow back the sudden urge to laugh. Excuse me, I say as soon as Fred's grip on my elbow loosens and I see the opportunity to escape. I'm going to get a drink. Fred smiles at me, although his eyes are dark. The warning is plain: behave. Of course, he says lightly. As I make my way across the living room, the crowd presses tightly around him, blocking him from view. A linen-draped table has been set up in front of the large bay windows, which look out onto the Hargroves' well-manicured lawn and impeccable flower beds, where blooms have been organized by height, type, and color. I ask for water and try and make myself as inconspicuous as possible, hoping to avoid conversation for at least a few minutes. There she is. Hana. Remember me? From across the room, Celia Briggs, who is standing next to Stephen Hilt, wearing a dress that makes it look as though she has stumbled accidentally into an enormous pile of blue chiffon, is frantically trying to get my attention. I look away, pretending not to have seen her. As she begins barging toward me, pulling Stephen by the sleeve, I push into the hall and speed toward the back of the house. I wonder whether Celia knows what happened last summer, how Stephen and I breathed into each other's mouths, and let feelings pass between each other's tongues. Maybe Stephen has told her. Maybe they laugh about it now that we are all safely on the other side of those roiling, frightening nights. I head to the screened-in porch at the back of the house, but this too is packed with people. As I'm about to pass the kitchen, I hear the swell of Mrs. Hargrove's voice: "Grab that bucket of ice, will you? The bartender's almost out." Hoping to avoid her, I duck into Fred's study, shutting the door quickly behind me. Mrs. Hargrove will only pilot me firmly back to the party, back to Celia Briggs, and the room full of all those teeth. I lean against the door, exhaling slowly. My eyes land on the single painting in the room, the man, the hunter, and the butchered carcasses. Only this time, I don't look away. There's something wrong with the hunter. He's dressed too well, in an old-fashioned suit and polished boots. Unconsciously, I take 2 steps closer, horrified and unable to look away. The animals strung from meat hooks aren't animals at all. They're women. Corpses, human corpses strung from the ceiling and piled on the marble floor. Next to the artist's signature is a small, painted note: "The Myth of Bluebeard, or The Dangers of Disobedience." I feel a need I can't exactly name to speak, or scream, or run. Instead, I sit down on the stiff-backed leather chair behind the desk, lean forward, and rest my head on my arms and try to remember how to cry. But nothing comes except for a faint itch in my throat and a headache. I don't know how long I have been sitting like that when I become aware of a siren drawing closer. Then the room is thrown suddenly into color, flashes of red and white burst intermittently through the window pane. The sirens are still going though, and then I realize that they are everywhere, both near and close, some wailing shrilly just down the street and some no louder than an echo. Something is wrong. I move out into the hall just as several doors slam at once. The murmur of conversation and the music have stopped. Instead, I hear people shouting over one another. Fred bursts into the hall and comes striding toward me, just after I've closed the door to his study. He stops when he sees me. "Where were you?" he asks. "The porch," I say quickly. My heart is beating hard. I needed some air. He opens his mouth. Just then my mother comes into the hall, her face pale. "Hana," she says. "There you are. What happened?" I ask. More and more people are flowing out of the living room, regulators in their pressed uniforms, Fred's bodyguards, 2 solemn-faced police officers, and Patrick Riley wrestling on his blazer. Cell phones are ringing, and bursts of walkie-talkie static fill the hall. "There's been a disturbance at the border wall," my mother says, her eyes flitting nervously to Fred. "Resistors." I can tell from my mother's expression that my guess is right. "They've been killed, of course," Fred says loudly, so everyone can hear. "How many were there?" I ask. Fred turns to me as he's shoving his arms into his suit coat, which a gray-faced regulator has just passed him. "Does it matter? We've taken care of it." My mother shoots me a look and gives me a minute shake of the head. Behind him, a policeman murmurs into his walkie-talkie. 10-4, 10-4, we're on our way. You ready?" Patrick Riley asks Fred. Fred nods. Instantly, his cell phone starts blaring. He removes it from his pocket and silences it quickly. "Shit. We better hurry. The office phones are probably going crazy." My mom places an arm around my shoulders. I'm momentarily startled. It's very rare that we touch like this. She must be more worried than she seems. Come on, she says. Your father's waiting for us. Where are we going? I ask. She's already moving me toward the front of the house. Home, she says. Outside, the guests are already amassing. We join the line of people waiting for their cars. We see 7 and 8 people piling into sedans, women in long gowns squeezing on top of one another in backseats. It's obvious that no one wants to walk the streets, which are filled with the distant sounds of wailing. My father ends up riding in the front with Tony. My mom and I squeeze into the backseat with Mr. and Mrs. Brand, who both work in the Department of Sanitization. Normally, Mrs. Brand can't stop running her mouth. My mom has always speculated that the cure left her with no verbal self-control, but tonight we drive in silence. Tony goes faster than usual. It begins to rain. The street lamps pattern the windows with broken halos of light. Now, alert with fear and anxiety, I can't believe how stupid I've been. I make a sudden decision: no more going to Deering Highlands. It's too dangerous. Lena's family is not my problem. I have done all I can do. The guilt is still there, pressing at my throat, but I swallow it down. We pass under another street lamp, and the rain on the windows becomes long fingers. Then once again the car is swallowed in darkness. I imagine I see different figures moving through the dark, skating next to the car, faces merging in and out of the shadow. For a second, as we move beneath another street lamp, I see a hooded figure emerging from the woods at the side of the road. Our eyes meet, and I let out a small cry. Alex. It's Alex. What's the matter? My mother asks tensely. Nothing. By the time I turn around, he is gone, and then I'm sure I only imagined him. I must have imagined him. Alex is dead. He was taken down at the border and never made it into the wilds. I swallow hard. I thought I saw something. Don't worry, Hana, my mother says. We're perfectly safe in the car. But she leans forward and says sharply to Tony, can't you drive any faster? I think of the new wall, lit up by a spinning light, stained red with blood. What if there are more of them? What if they're coming for us? I have a vision of Lena moving out there, sneaking through the streets, ducking between shadows, holding a knife. For a moment my lungs stop moving. But no. She doesn't know I was the one who gave her and Alex away. No one knows. Besides, she is probably dead. And even if she isn't, even if by some miracle, she survived the escape and has been squeezing out a living in the wild, she would never join forces with the resistors. She would never be violent or vengeful. Not Lena, who used to practically faint when she pricked a finger, who couldn't even lie to a teacher about being late. She wouldn't have the stomach for it. Would she? Lena. The planning goes late into the night. The sandy-haired man, whose name is Colin, remains sequestered in one of the trailers with Beast and Pippa Graven and Tack, Max, Cap, my mother, and a few others he has handpicked from his group. He assigns a guard to watch the door. The meeting is invite only. I know that something big is in the works, as big as, if not bigger than, the incidents that blew part of a wall out of the crypts and exploded a police station. From hints that Max has let slip, I've gathered that this new rebellion is not simply confined to Portland. As in the earlier incidents in cities all across the country, sympathizers and invalids are gathering and channeling their anger and their energy into displays of resistance. At one point Max and Raven emerge from the trailer to pee in the woods, their faces drawn and serious, but when I beg Raven to let me join the meeting, she cuts me down immediately. Go to bed, Lena, she says. Everything's under control. It must be almost midnight. Julian has been asleep for hours. I can't imagine lying down right now. I feel like my blood is full of thousands of ants, my arms and legs are crawling, itching to move, to do something. I walk in circles trying to shake the feeling, and fuming, annoyed with Julian, furious with Raven, thinking of all the things I'd like to say to her. I was the one who got Julian out of the underground. I was the one who risked my life to sneak into New York City and save him. I was the one who got into Waterbury. I was the one who found out Lou was a fraud. And now Raven tells me to go to bed, like I'm an unruly 5-year-old. I take aim at a tin cup that has been lying, half buried in ash, at the edge of a burned-out campfire, and watch as it rockets 20 feet and pings off the side of a trailer. A man calls out, "Take it easy." But I don't care if I've woken him up. I don't care if I wake the whole damn camp up. Can't sleep. I spin around, startled. Coral is sitting a little ways behind me, knees hugged to her chest, next to the dying remains of another fire. Every so often she prods it half-heartedly with a stick. "Hey," I say cautiously. Since Alex left, she has gone almost completely mute. "I didn't see you." Her eyes go to mine. She smiles weakly. I can't sleep either. Even though I'm still antsy, it feels weird to be hovering above her, so I lower myself onto one of the smoke-blackened logs that ring the campfire. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" "Not really." She gives the fire another prod, watches as it flares momentarily. It doesn't matter for me, does it? What do you mean? I look at her closely for the first time in a week. I've been unconsciously avoiding her. There is something tragic and hollow about her now. Her cream pale skin looks like a husk, empty, sucked dry. She shrugs and keeps her eyes on the embers. I mean that I have no one left. I swallow. I've been meaning to speak to her about Alex, to apologize in some way, but the words never quite come. Even now they grow and stick in my throat. Listen, Coral. I take a deep breath. Say it. Just say it. I'm really sorry that Alex left. I know it must have been hard for you. There it is, the spoken admission that he was hers to lose. As soon as the words leave my mouth, I feel weirdly deflated, as though they've been swollen, balloon-like in my chest this whole time. For the first time since I sat down, she looks at me. I can't read the expression on her face. That's okay, she says at last, returning her gaze to the fire. He was still in love with you anyway. It's as though she's reached out and punched me in the stomach. All of a sudden, I can't breathe. What are you talking about? Her mouth crooks up into a smile. He was. It was obvious. That's okay. He liked me and I liked him. She shakes her head. I didn't mean Alex, anyway, when I said I had no one left. I meant Nan, and the rest of the group. My people. She throws down the stick and hugs her knees tighter to her chest. Weird how it's just hitting me now, huh? Even though I'm still stunned by what she has just said, I manage to keep control of myself. I reach out and touch her elbow. Hey, I say. You have us. We're your people now. Thanks. Her eyes flick to mine again. She forces a smile. She tilts her head and stares at me critically for a minute. I can see why he loved you. Coral, you're wrong, I start to say. But just then there's a footfall behind us, and my mother says, I got you went to sleep hours ago. Coral stands up, dusting off the back of her jeans, a nervous gesture, since we are all covered in dirt, caked grime that has found its way from our eyelashes to our fingernails. I was just going, she says. Good night, Lena. And thanks. Before I can respond, she spins around and heads off toward the southern end of the clearing, where most of our group is clustered. She seems like a sweet girl, my mother says, easing herself down onto the log Coral has vacated. Too sweet for the wilds. She's been here almost her whole life. I can't keep the edge from my voice. And she's a great fighter. My mother stares at me. Is something wrong? What's wrong is that I don't like being kept in the dark. I want to know what the plan is tomorrow. My heart is going hard. I know I'm not being fair to my mother, it isn't her fault, I wasn't allowed in to plan, but I feel like I could scream. Coral's words have shaken something loose inside me, and I can feel it rattling around in my chest, knifing against my lungs. He was still in love with you. No. It's impossible. She got it all wrong. He never loved me. He told me so. My mother's face turned serious. Lena, you have to promise me that you'll stay here, at the camp tomorrow. You have to promise me you won't fight. Now it's my turn to stare. What? She rakes a hand through her hair, making it look as though it has been styled with an electric current. Nobody knows exactly what we can expect inside that wall. The security forces are estimates, and we're not sure how much support our friends in Portland have drummed up. I was urging a delay, but I was overruled. She shakes her head. It's dangerous, Lena. I don't want you to be a part of it. The rattling piece in my chest, the anger and sadness over losing Alex, and also, more than that even, over this life that we string together from scraps and tatters and half-spoken words and promises that are not fulfilled, explode suddenly. You still don't get it, do you? I am practically shaking. I'm not a child anymore. I grew up. I grew up without you. And you can't tell me what to do. I half expect her to snap back at me, but she just sighs and stares at the smoldering orange glow still embedded in the ash, like a buried sunset. Then she says abruptly, do you remember the story of Solomon? Her words are so unexpected that for a moment, I can't speak. I can only nod. Tell me, she says. Tell me what you remember. Alex's note, still tucked into the pouch around my neck, seems to be smoldering too, burning against my chest. Two mothers are fighting over a child, I say cautiously. They decide to cut the baby in half. The king decrees it. My mother shakes her head. No. That's the revised version. That's the story in the book of SHHH. In the real story, the mothers don't cut the baby in half. I go very still, almost afraid to breathe. I feel as though I'm teetering on a precipice, on the verge of understanding, and I'm not yet sure if I want to go over. My mother goes on, in the real story, King Solomon decides that the baby should be cut in half. But it's only a test. One mother agrees. The other woman says that she'll give up claim to the baby altogether. She doesn't want the child injured. My mother turns her eyes to me. Even in the dark, I can see their sparkle, the clarity that has never gone away. That's how the king identifies the real mother. She's willing to sacrifice her claim, sacrifice her happiness to keep the baby safe. I close my eyes and see embers burning behind my lids, blood-red dawn, smoke and fire, Alex behind the ash. All of a sudden, I know. I understand the meaning of his note. I'm not trying to control you, Lena, my mother says, her voice low. I just want you to be safe. That's what I've always wanted. I open my eyes. The memory of Alex standing behind the fence as a black swarm enfolded him recedes. It's too late. My voice sounds hollow and not like my own. I've seen things. I've lost things you can't understand. It's the closest I've come to speaking about Alex. Thankfully, she doesn't pry. She just nods. I'm tired. I push myself to my feet. My body too feels unfamiliar, as though I'm a puppet that has begun to come apart at the seams. Alex sacrificed himself once so that I could live and be happy. Now he has done it again. I've been so stupid. And he is gone. There is no way for me to reach him and tell him I know and understand. There is no way for me to tell him that I am still in love with him too. I'm going to get some sleep, I tell her, avoiding her eyes. I think that's a good idea, she says. I've already started to move away from her when she calls out to me. I turn around. The fire has now burned out completely, and her face is swallowed in darkness. We make for the wall at dawn, she says. Hana. I can't sleep. Tomorrow I will no longer be myself. I will walk down the white carpet and stand under the white canopy and pronounce vows of loyalty and purpose. Afterward, white petals will rain down on me, scattered by the priests, by the guests, by my parents. I will be reborn, blank, clean, featureless, like the world after a blizzard. I stay up all night and watch dawn break slowly over the horizon, touching the world with white. Lena. I'm in a crowd, watching two children fight over a baby. They are playing tug of war, pulling it violently back and forth, and the baby is blue, and I know they are shaking it to death. I'm trying to push through the crowd, but more and more people are surging around me, blocking my path, making it impossible to move. And then, just as I feared, the baby falls, it hits the pavement, and shatters into 1,000 pieces, like a china doll. Then all the people are gone. I am alone on a road, and in front of me, a girl with long tangled hair is bent over the shattered doll, piecing it back together painstakingly, humming to herself. The day is bright and perfectly still. Each of my footsteps rings out like a gunshot, but she doesn't look up until I am standing directly in front of her. Then she does, and she is Grace. See, she says, extending the doll toward me. I fixed it. And I see that the doll's face is my own and webbed with thousands of tiny fissures and cracks. Grace cradles the doll in her arms. Wake up, she croons. Wake up. I open my eyes, my mother is standing above me. I sit up, my body stiff, working, feeling into my fingers and toes, flexing and unflexing. The air is hung with mist, and the sky is just beginning to lighten. The ground is covered with frost, which has seeped through my blanket while I was sleeping, and the wind has a bitter, morning edge. The camp is busy around me, people are stirring, standing, moving like shadows through the half-darkness. Fires are sparking to life, and every so often, I hear a burst of conversation, a shouted command. My mother reaches out a hand and helps me to my feet. Incredibly, she looks rested and alert. I stomp the stiffness out of my legs. Coffee will get your blood moving, she says. It doesn't surprise me that Raven, Tack, Pippic and Beast are already up. They are standing with Colin and a dozen others near one of the larger fire pits, their breath clouding the air as they speak in low tones. There is a stockpot of coffee on the fire, bitter and full of grains, but hot. I start to feel better and more awake after I've had only a few sips. But I can't bring myself to eat anything. Raven raises her eyebrows when she sees me. My mother gestures to her, a motion of resignation, and Raven turns back to Colin. All right, he's saying. Like we talked about last night, we move in 3 groups into the city. First group goes in an hour, does the scouting, and makes contact with our friends. The main force doesn't budge until the blast at 1200 hours. The third group will follow immediately afterward and head straight to the target. Hey. Julian comes up behind me. His eyes still have a puffy, just awake look, and his hair is hopelessly tangled. I missed you last night. Last night, I couldn't bring myself to lie down next to Julian. Instead, I found a free blanket and made my bed out in the open, next to 100 other women. For a long time, I stared up at the stars, remembering the first time I came to the wilds with Alex, how he led me into one of the trailers and unrolled the tarp that served as its ceiling so we could see the sky. So much between us went unsaid. That is the danger and beauty of life without the cure. There is always wilderness and tangle, and the path is never clear. Julian begins to reach for me, and I take a step backward. I was having trouble sleeping, I say. I didn't want to wake you. Julian frowns. I can't bring myself to make eye contact with him. Over the past week, I've accepted that I will never love Julian as much as I loved Alex. But now that idea is overwhelming, like a wall between us. I will never love Julian like I love Alex. What's wrong with you? Julian is watching me warily. Nothing, I say, and then repeat nothing. Did something, Julian starts to say when Raven whirls around and glares at him. Hey, Jules, she barks out, which she has taken to calling Julian when she's annoyed. This isn't gossip hour, okay? Shut it or clear out. Julian falls quiet. I turn my eyes to Colin, and Julian doesn't try to touch me or move closer. The sky is now streaked with long filaments of orange and red, like the tendrils of a massive jellyfish, floating in a milk-white ocean. The mist rises. The earth begins to shake itself awake. Portland too will be stirring. Colin tells us the plan. Hana. On my last morning as Hana Tate, I drink my coffee onto the front porch alone. I had planned to take a final bike ride, but there is no hope of that now, not after what happened last night. The streets will be crawling with police and regulators. I'll have to show my papers and field questions I can't answer. Instead, I sit on the porch swing, taking comfort in its rhythmic squeaking. The air is morning still, cool and gray, and textured with salt. I can tell it will be a perfect day, cloudless and bright. Every so often, a seagull cries sharply. Other than that, it's silent. Here there are no alarms, no sirens, no hint of the disturbance last night. But downtown it will be different. There will be barricades and security checks, reinforced security at the new wall. I remember, suddenly, what Fred told me once about the wall, that it would be like the palm of God, cupping us forever in safety, keeping out the disease to damage the unfaithful and unworthy. But maybe we can never be truly safe. I wonder whether there will be new raids in the Highlands, whether the families there will be once again displaced and quickly dismiss the concern. Lena's family is beyond my reach. I see that now. I should have seen that always. What happens to them, whether they starve or freeze, is none of my business. We are all punished for the lives we have chosen in one way or another. I will be paying my penance to Lena for failing her. To her family, for helping her every day of my life. I close my eyes and picture the old port, the textured streets, the boat slips, the sun breaking loose of the water, and the waves lapping against the wharves. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. I mentally trace a route from Eastern Prom to the top of Munjoy Hill. I see all of Portland spread vastly below me, glittering in new light. Hana. I open my eyes. My mother has stepped onto the porch. She holds her thin nightgown close to her body, squinting. Her skin, without makeup, looks almost gray. You should probably get into the shower, she says. I stand up and follow her into the house. Lena. We've moved to the wall. There must be 400 of us, massed in the trees. Last night, a small task force made the crossing to prepare last minute for the full-scale breach today. And earlier this morning another small group, Colin's people, hand-selected, got over the fence on the west side of Portland, close to the crypts, where the wall has not yet been built and security has been compromised by friends, allies on the inside. But that was hours ago, and now there is nothing to do but wait for the signal. The main force will breach the wall at once. Most of Portland's security will be busy at the labs. I've gathered that there is a large event there today. There should only be a limited number of officers to hold us off, although Colin is worried that last night's breach didn't go as smoothly as planned. It's possible that inside the wall, there are more regulators, more guns than we think. We'll just have to see. From where I am crouching in the underbrush, I can occasionally see Pippa 50 yards off when she shifts behind the juniper bush she has chosen to conceal her. I wonder if she's nervous. Pippa has one of the most important roles of all. She is in charge of one of the bombs. The main force, the chaos at the wall, is meant mostly to enable the bombers, 4 in total, to slip unnoticed into Portland. Pippa's end goal is 88 Essex Street, an address I don't recognize, probably a government building, like the rest of the targets. The sun inches up into the sky. 10 a.m. 10:30 a.m. Noon. Any minute now. We wait. Hana. The car's here. My mother rests a hand on my shoulder. Are you ready to go? I don't trust myself to speak, so I nod. The girl in the mirror, blonde tendrils of hair pinned and pulled back, eyelashes dark with mascara, skin flawless, lips penciled in, nods as well. I'm very proud of you, my mother says in an undertone. People are bustling in and out of the room, photographers and makeup artists and Debbie, the hairdresser, and I imagine she is embarrassed. My mother has never in her whole life admitted to being proud of me. Here. My mother helps me slip into a soft cotton robe, so my dress sweeping, long and fastened at the shoulder with a gold clip in the shape of an eagle, the animal to which Fred is most often compared will remain spotless during the short drive down to the labs. A group of journalists is clustered outside the gates, and as I emerge onto the porch, I am startled by the glare from so many lenses turned in my direction, the rapid-fire click-click-click of the shutters. The sun floats in the cloudless sky, a single white eye. It must be just before noon. I'm glad as soon as we make it to the car. The interior is dark and cool, and I know that no one can see me behind the tinted windows. I really don't believe it. My mother plays with her bracelets. She's more excited than I've ever seen her. I really thought this day would never come. Isn't that silly? Silly, I echo. As we pull out of the subdivision, I see that the police presence has been redoubled. Half the streets leading downtown have been barricaded, patrolled by regulators, police, and even some men wearing the silver badges of the military guard. By the time I can see the sloped white roofs of the laboratory complex where Fred and I will be married in one of the largest medical conference rooms big enough to accommodate 1,000 witnesses, the crowd in the streets is so dense Tony can hardly inch the car along through it. It seems as though all of Portland has turned out to watch me get married. People reach out and knuckle the hood of the car for good luck. Hands gump against the roof and the windows, making me jump. And police wade through the crowd, moving people aside, trying to clear a space for the car, intoning, "Let him through, let him through." A series of police barricades has been erected just outside the laboratory gates. Several regulators move them aside so we can pass into the small paved parking lot just in front of the lab's main entrance. I recognize Fred's family's car. He must be here already. My stomach gives a weird twist. I haven't been to the lab since my procedure was completed, since I entered a miserable, chewed-up girl full of guilt and hurt and anger, and emerged something different, cleaner, and less confused. That was the day they cut Lena away from me, and Steve Hill, too, and all those sweaty, dark nights when I wasn't sure of anything. But that was really only the beginning of the cure. This, the pairing, the wedding, and Fred is its conclusion. The gates have been locked behind us again, and the barricades restored. Still, as I climb out of the car, I can feel the crowd pressing closer, closer, itching to come in to watch, to see me pledge my life and future to the path that has been chosen for me. But the ceremony will not begin for another 15 minutes, and the gates will remain closed until then. Behind the revolving glass doors, I can see Fred waiting for me, unsmiling, arms folded. His face is distorted by the glare and the glass. From this distance it looks as though his skin is full of holes. "It's time," my mother says. "I know," I say, and I pass in front of her, into the building. "Lena. It's time." The rifle shots explode simultaneously in the distance, a dozen of them at least, and just like that, we are moving as one. We are running out of the trees, hundreds of us drumming up mud and dirt, the rhythm of our feet like a single swollen heartbeat. 2 rope ladders appear over the side of the wall, then another 2, and then 3 more. So far, so good. The first of our group reaches a ladder, jumps, and swings upward. In the distance, a band is playing a wedding march. Hana. Outside the laboratories, the guards, nearly 24 of them, arrayed in spotless uniforms, fire off their rifle salutes, signaling that the ceremony can proceed. The large windows of the conference room are open, and through them we can hear the band begin to play a wedding march. Most of the onlookers have not been able to squeeze into the labs and will be clustered outside, listening, straining to see through the windows. The priest is wearing a microphone, so his voice will be amplified, so it will reach every member of the assembled crowd, touch them with his words of perfection and honor, of duty and safety. A platform has been erected in the center of the room, just in front of the podium where the priest will conduct the ceremony. 2 participants, both dressed symbolically, in lab coats, help me onto it. When Fred takes my hands in his and lays them on top of the book of SHHH, a small sigh travels the room, an exhalation of relief. This is what we are made for: promises, pledges, and sworn oaths of obedience. Lena. I'm halfway up the ladder when the alarms begin to sound. A second later there is another explosion of gunfire. There is nothing coordinated about these shots. They explode in rapid staccato, deafeningly close, and just like that the air is a symphony of shouts and shots and screams. A woman straddling the wall topples backward and tumbles to the ground with a sickening thud, blood bubbling from her chest. Only 1/10 of our number has made it over the wall. The air is suddenly thick with gun smoke. People are yelling, "Go, stop, move, stop where you are or I'll shoot." For a second I freeze on the ladder, swinging, petrified. My hands slip a little, and I barely manage to right myself before falling. I can't remember how to move. At the top of the ladder, a regulator is hacking at the ropes with a knife. "Go. Lena, go." Julian is beneath me on the ladder. He reaches up and pushes, jolting me back into my body. I begin working my way upward again, ignoring the searing pain in my palms. Better to fight the regulators on the ground, where we have a chance. Anything is better than swinging here, exposed like a fish on a line. The ladder shudders. The regulator is still working feverishly with his knife. He is young, he looks somehow familiar, and sweat is matting his blonde hair to his forehead. Beast has just made it to the top of the wall. There's a crack, and a small yelp, as he drives his elbow into the regulator's nose. The rest happens quickly. Beast gets his fist around the man's knife and thrusts. The regulator slumps forward, eyes unseeing, and Beast heaves him unceremoniously over the wall, as though he is a sack of garbage. He too thuds when he hits the ground. Only then do I recognize him as a boy from Joffrey's academy, someone Hana once spoke to at the beach. My age, we were evaluated on the same day. No time to think about that now. 2 more strong pulls get me to the top of the wall. I slide onto my stomach, pressing hard into the stone, trying to stay as small as possible. Compact. The inside of the wall is crisscrossed with scaffolding left over from construction. Only a few portions of the stone catwalk, meant for patrols, are complete. There are bodies tangled everywhere, people fighting, locked together, struggling for the advantage. Pippa is working her way grimly up the ladder to my right. Tak has dropped into a crouch on the scaffolding. He is covering her, sweeping a gun from left to right, picking off the guards who are rushing us from the ground. Raven goes behind Pippa, the handle of a knife gripped in her mouth, a gun strapped to her hip. Her face is taut and focused. Everything registers in bursts, flashes. Guards running at the wall, materializing from guard huts and warehouses. Sirens wailing, police. They've been quick to respond to the alarms. And beneath this, a squeeze in my gut, the landscape of roofs and roads. The grim gray flow of pavement. Back Cove, shimmering in front of me. Parks dotted in the distance. The sweep of the bay, beyond the distant white blot that is the laboratory complex, Portland. My home. For a moment, I'm worried I'll faint. There are too many people, bodies swarming and swinging, faces contorted and grotesque, and too much sound. My throat burns with smoke. A piece of the scaffolding has caught fire. And still we haven't gotten more than a quarter of our number over the wall. I can't see my mother. I don't know what happened to her. Then Julian has made it over, and he wraps an arm around my waist and forces me to my knees. Down. Down. He's shouting, and we gut hard onto our knees as a series of bullets lodge into the wall behind us, spraying us with fine dust and stone spit. The scaffolding groans and sways beneath us. Guards have massed on the ground, heaving its supports, trying to topple it. Julian shouts something. His words are lost, but I know he is telling me that we need to move, we need to get to the ground. Next to me, Tak has reached back to help Pippa over the wall. She moves clumsily, weighted down by the backpack she carries. For a second, I imagine that the bomb will go off right here, right now, the blood and fire, the sweet-smelling smoke and the ricocheting stone shrapnel, but then Pippa is safely over the wall and climbing to her feet. Just then a guard on the ground swings his rifle toward Pippa, clocks her in his sights. I want to scream, I want to warn her, but I can't make a sound. Down, Pippa. Raven launches herself over the wall, knocking Pippa out of the way just as the guard squeezes the trigger. Pop. The littlest noise. A toy firecracker sound. Raven jerks and stiffens. For a second, I think she is only surprised, her mouth goes round, her eyes wide. Then she begins teetering backward, and I know that she is dead. Falling, falling, falling. No. Tak lunges forward and grabs hold of her shirt before she can tumble back over the wall, pulling her down and onto his lap. People are swarming all around him, seething like rats over the scaffolding, but he just sits there, rocking a bit, cupping her face in his hands. He wipes her forehead, brushes the hair away from her face. She stares up at him sightlessly, her mouth open and wet, eyes shock wide, black braid coiled against his thigh. His lips are moving, he's speaking to her. And now there is a scream inside me, silent and huge, like a black hole tunneling deep through my center. I can't move, can't do anything but stare. This is not how Raven dies, not here, not in this way, not in one flimsy second, not without a fight. Pop goes the weasel. The child's game comes back to me then, the way we used to chase one another around the park. Pop. You're it. This is all a child's game. We are playing with shiny tin toys and loud noises. We are playing two sides, like we used to when we were children. Pop. White-hot pain blazes through me, past me. I bring my hand to my face instinctively and feel for injury. My fingers graze my ear and come away wet with blood. A bullet must have just clipped me. The shock, even more than the pain, wakes me up, kicks my body into motion. There weren't enough guns to go around, but I have a knife, old and blunted, but still better than nothing. I wrestle it out of the leather pouch around my hips. Julian is making his way down the scaffolding, swinging along the crisscrossed iron bars like a monkey. A guard tries to grab hold of one of Julian's legs. Julian twists and brings his foot hard into the guard's face. The guard staggers back, releasing him, and Julian drops the remaining few feet to the ground into the chaos of bodies, invalids and officers our side and their side, merging into one enormous, writhing, bloody animal. I scoot to the edge of the catwalk and make the jump. The few seconds I am airborne and a target are the most terrifying. I am totally exposed, totally vulnerable. 2 seconds, 3 seconds, tops, but it feels like an eternity. I hit the ground, nearly on top of a regulator, and take him down with me as my ankle twists and I tumble onto the gravel. We are a wild tangle, momentarily entwined, struggling to gain the advantage. He tries to aim his gun at me, but I get his wrist in my hand and twist backward hard. He yelps and drops the gun. Someone kicks it, and the gun spins away from my fingers into the gray dust chaos. Then I see it barely a foot away. The regulator spots it at the same time, and we reach for it simultaneously. He's bigger than I am, but slower too. I have it in my hand, blows my fingers around the trigger a full second before him, and his fist connects with nothing but dirt. He roars, enraged, and lunges for me. I swing the gun up, catch him in the side of the head, hear a crack as the gun connects with his temple. He goes slack, and I launch myself to my feet before I can be trampled. My mouth tastes like metal and dust, and my head has started to throb. I don't see Julian. I don't see my mother, or Colin, or Hunter. Then a rocking mortar blast, an explosion of stone and white cock dust. The blow nearly takes me off my feet. At first I think one of the bombs must have been triggered accidentally, and I look around for Pippa, trying to clear my head of the ringing of the stinging, choking dust, just in time to see her slip undetected, between two guard huts, heading for downtown. Behind me, one of the scaffolds groans and begins to topple. There is a sharp swell in the screaming. Hands dig at my back as everyone presses forward, trying to break free from its path. Slowly, groaning, it teeters and then accelerating, crashes to the ground, splintering, trapping the unlucky ones beneath its weight. The wall is now sporting a gaping hole at its base. I realize this must have been the work of a pipe bomb, an explosion jerry-rigged by the resistance. Pippa's bomb would have ripped the wall in two. Still, it's enough. Our remaining forces are spilling through the opening, a current of people who have been pushed or forced out, dispossessed and diseased, flooding into Portland. The guards, a ragged line of blue and white uniforms, are swallowed up in the tide, pushed back and forced to run. I've lost Julian. No point in trying to find him now. I can only pray that he is safe, and that he'll make it out of this mess unharmed. I don't know what happened to Tack either. Part of me hopes that he has retreated over the wall with Raven, and for a second I imagine that once he has gotten her back to the wilds, she'll wake up. She'll open her eyes and find that the world has been rebuilt the way she wanted it. Or maybe she won't wake up. Maybe she is already on a different pilgrimage, and has gone to find Blue again. I push my way toward the place I saw Pippa vanish, struggling to breathe in the smoke-clouded air. One of the guard huts is burning. I flash back to the old license plate we found, half buried in the mud, during our migration from Portland last winter. Live free or die. I stumble over a body. My stomach heaves into my mouth for a split second. I'm overcome by blackness, coiled tight in my stomach like Raven's hair on Tack's leg. Raven's dead. Oh God, but I swallow and breathe and keep going, keep fighting and pushing. We wanted the freedom to love. We wanted the freedom to choose. Now we have to fight for it. At last I break free of the fighting. I duck past the guard huts, breaking into a run on the gravel path that divides them, heading for the sparse group of trees that encircles Back Cove. My ankle hurts every time I put my weight down on it, but I don't stop. I swipe my ear quickly with my sleeve, and judge that the bleeding has already slowed. The resistance may have a mission in Portland, but I have a mission of my own.